Thanks, Mary. So it's become pretty obvious that today's state of environmental crisis is one of the greatest challenges that humanity is currently facing. Now, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm an artist and curator, and I'm passionate about the role that interdisciplinary art can play in community empowerment, social activism, and cultural change. And as an optimist, despite this image, I also think we are living in one of the most exciting times. We've never been this connected. We've never had access to this much information, and we've never had the infinite possibilities that today's technology can now offer us. So most of my work revolves around exploring new ways to use creativity and technology as tools for positive global change. Now, personally, I see that there are two really clear opportunities for technology to play in times of crisis. The first is in creating frameworks that can inspire and empower communities to tell their stories with digital technology. Because communities that have experienced a natural disaster, they don't just need the tools to help rebuild their physical infrastructure, they need tools to help rebuild their social and cultural identity. The second opportunity I see is platforms that can enable us to share this content with communities across the globe. Because at a time where we are going to experience more and more natural disasters, one of our most important tools is going to be the ability to creatively share advice, ideas, and actions with other communities. Now, I also see these can be the interface for data-driven public artworks, and potentially create education and awareness around climate change, and possibly even inform communities of natural disasters before they actually happen. So there are plenty of people putting these things into action, and one of my particular interests and passions is the role that sound can play in this process. Because in an increasingly visually dominant society, we often think of the world as a place that we see, rather than a place that we hear. Listening provides more information about our surrounding environment than any other sense. Yet we so often ignore it. And in this age where we're constantly surrounded by the noise of global communications, this is a perception that has become at risk. So, despite working mainly in an interdisciplinary context, my background is as a musician. Sound has always been my language. I've been playing music since I could walk, and I've been writing music since I was a teenager. And I'm classically trained, and as a composer, I was always very experimental. And my love for technology really started in late undergraduate studies when I created my first electroacoustic composition using environmental field recordings. I was immediately hooked on this new sound world, as this technology that I had feared and avoided in a way as a classical composer had suddenly opened up this musical language of infinite possibilities. I could now sculpt sound in real time, and I had access to an acoustic palette literally as wide as the environment itself, in the words of Simon Emerson. So this is basically the point where my creative practice and my environmental activism started to come together. And I created and performed works that revolved around drawing attention to our ecological crisis and endangered ecosystems. Now, these often use multi-channel field recordings, live performers, and projections. And while this was a fantastic experience and I had lots of opportunities to perform this work across the world, there's certainly a big difference between performing this style of work in places like New York and Montreal to regional communities in Australia or isolated areas of India. So I was basically challenged by some of the contradictions of my work, as the intention was to empower and inspire communities to listen to the environment. But I realised I needed more than just a performance to do this, particularly in areas that weren't traditionally exposed to this style of work. I needed to create education around these projects. So this was the point where my practice started to shift towards community engagement practice and education. It became about embedding these projects within a framework that's developed in response to these communities. And like many of my projects, I jumped straight in the deep end before I had any idea actually what this framework was or how to create it. So like many artists with wildly ambitious ideas trying to create experimental frameworks, I started a PhD to basically document and understand what I was doing. And like many PhDs, this quite overwhelming process ranged from exciting breakthroughs to quite dramatic breakdowns. But my PhD provided this fantastic opportunity to completely transform what I do as an artist and how I actually do it. So basically, my PhD was practice-based research, and it involved creating 7 original works. And these were created in cultural immersion, spanning from quite ambitious sonic explorations in the centre of the Amazon jungle to sounding the rivers of the world through places like India, Australia, Brazil, and China. Each work was created in cultural immersion. It was important to me that it was relevant to the community and challenging for my creative practice. And each work became an experiment, one step further in exploring new ways that creativity, technology, and community engagement could be a catalyst for change. So initially, my PhD involved quite a lot of ranting. How we don't listen and how we're in such a visually dominant society. And so I developed these new listening processes to re-engage us with the environment. And I started working with Indigenous communities in places like India and Brazil. And what I discovered was that these communities didn't share this visual dominance at all. Communities that had been living sustainably for thousands of years often had balanced perceptions and were in some cases more auditory dominant. So this completely shifted my research and changed how I personally was responding to the environment. This ranged from working with communities in the Amazon jungle who would listen to decide where to enter a particular part of the forest. Working with Lyndon Davis here in Noosa, who taught me about listening to a river. Working with Jo Tito in New Zealand on her perceptions of listening to the ocean. To back here in India, working with the communities of the Aterm Ritual, whose entire lives revolve around sound through conducting elaborate chanting rituals that are designed to heal the natural environment. Now, this is a 3,000-year-old Vedic ritual from Kerala in South India, and it's believed to be one of the oldest surviving unbroken traditions of humankind. This isn't simply about responding to the environment with sound. It's about conversing and healing, understanding the power that sound actually has in our environment. So unfortunately, this tradition is now at risk. So in this context, I'm exploring the value of technology and creativity in the preservation and conservation of this ritual. It's not simply about documenting it and leaving, but empowering these communities to collaborate and be part of the process. So this is one of my favourite images from the project, as it's a photo of one of the students listening to the sound of his recorded voice for the very first time. So throughout this process, my practice has basically shifted from just composing music to creating experiences and connecting communities and cultures through the process of listening. Listening tunes our brains to the patterns of the environment faster than any other sense. It's such a critical perception, and it's so important for us to listen in these times of ecological crisis. So one of the main outcomes of my PhD was creating a framework called Sonic Ecologies. And this is essentially an accessible model to allow artists to implement similar projects. And it's basically underpinned by connecting creativity, technology, community engagement, and the process of listening to create cultural change. So Sound Mirrors is the first major project created with the Sonic Ecologies framework. Since 2009, I've travelled through Australia, India, Korea, Brazil, capturing the sounds of rivers and their surrounding communities. So this process has varied from sculpting and layering sounds recorded on location to directly responding to the natural environment. And this basically resulted in a series of soundscapes that have toured nationally and internationally as both a gallery installation and a live performance. So these creative outcomes essentially act as a catalyst to engage communities across the world in the preservation of river systems. And one of the most successful outcomes that resulted from this project was to leave a low-cost digital recorder with a key stakeholder in the community and set up a web platform that could enable that community to continue uploading content. And this outcome sparked the beginning of a series of other projects, including Sonic Explorers. So Sonic Explorers is a global interdisciplinary project that's underpinned by the creative possibilities of soundscape ecology. Now, soundscape ecology is a new and evolving field of biology where scientists record a given habitat to listen for patterns and changes. So the Sonic Explorers project basically involves sound mapping, installations, collaborative compositions, and workshops, all revolving around connecting young people to the environment through sound. As the future leaders, it became so critical throughout my research that engaging young people in these practices was so important. It would be fundamental if this was going to work. So the Sonic Explorers project is now delivered in partnership with Ear to the Earth in New York. And it's essentially a global platform that's inspiring communities with young people across the world to listen and explore the soundscapes of their community. So the final project I want to introduce today is Biosphere Soundscapes. Now, this is by far my biggest project to date. And again, it's underpinned by the creative possibilities of soundscape ecology. So this is essentially a global project designed to empower and inspire people across the world to re-engage in listening in the environment. And it's also about reimagining the potential of UNESCO Biosphere reserves as learning laboratories for a sustainable future. So the creative content that's generated in this project is embedded in a virtual interactive sound map that calls attention to our changing sonic environments. Now, this also enables Biosphere network performances, collaborative compositions, and ultimately the ability to stream soundscapes in real time between Biosphere reserves. So there are now 610 Biosphere reserves in 117 countries. And these are sites that are managed by passionate communities who want to explore new approaches to the conservation of biological and cultural diversity. So these are ideal sites to test and demonstrate innovative approaches to sustainability. And this is the first major international project that's connecting the soundscapes of Biosphere reserves. So this all started right here in the Noosa Biosphere Reserve, and it's currently expanding in 10 Biosphere reserves across 5 continents, with the vision to map the soundscapes of 100 UNESCO Biosphere reserves in the next 10 years. So this is truly an art-science project, as on the one hand, the soundscapes are providing valuable scientific information. They can be used for biodiversity analysis and soundscape ecology. And on the other hand, it's a rich creative tool for multi-platform engagement online. So this is an example of combining passionate community engagement with the infinite possibilities of technology to inspire a culture of listening and environmental awareness. So from the Vedic chants in the backwaters of South India to these interactive sound maps that are connecting continents, these projects ultimately explore how sound can define our cultures and bind our communities, and ultimately how the process of very simply listening to the environment can change how we think and act and inspire us in these times of ecological uncertainty. So I want to finish this presentation today by playing you a very short soundscape. And I want to encourage you all to start actively listening, particularly to the sounds that you often ignore, to the sounds of your community, and to how soundscapes change throughout the day. So I want you to close your eyes and really listen to this example. This is a field recording I did in the centre of the Amazon jungle. It's commonly called the lungs of the world, and it's certainly one of the most important locations on Earth. but it's also one of the most endangered areas, with these forests constantly destroyed and left in silence.